I'm John Rowe, Mayor of the City of Portsmouth, and I call the session of the Portsmouth City Council scheduled for today, Tuesday, November the 10th, 2020 at 5 p.m. to order. And Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Battle,
Here.
Mr. Clark,
Here.
Mr. Glover,
Here.
Mrs. Lucas Burke,
Here.
Mr. Moody,
Here.
Miss Simmons,
Here.
Mayor Rowe.
Here. Ladies and gentlemen, in accordance with Governor Ralph Northam's declaration of a state of emergency due to the COVID-19 virus, his executive order number 51 that he signed on March 12, 2020, and the local declaration of emergency ratified by the Portsmouth City Council. And due to the fact that this pandemic is continuing in the United States, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and here in Portsmouth, this meeting, work session of the Portsmouth City Council is being held by video conference today, the 10th day of November 2020, without a quorum of city council members present in the city council chamber. And we're doing this in order to reduce the likely spread of the COVID-19 virus. And this is in accordance with City Council Ordinance 2020-21 and 2020-102. Each member of council is participating from their home or some other remote location, and I'm in the council chamber. And before we start, I want to take a matter of personal privilege and congratulate Mayor-elect Shannon Glover on your election to the position of mayor, and congratulate our Vice Mayor Lisa Lucas Burke on her re-election to City Council, and to Councilman-elect DeAndre Barnes and Councilman-elect Dr. Mark Whitaker. Congratulations. And we look forward to you joining us as we proceed towards the end of this calendar year, December 31st. We still have an awful lot of work to do before the end of the calendar year. And with that, we'll start our public work session. We'll have a discussion about the D2 form-based code zoning replacement. Mr. Pace.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the City Council. Mr. Bob Baldwin will make this presentation on the D2 form-based code zoning replacement.
And good evening, Mayor Rowe, Vice Mayor Lucas Burke, and members of council. It's been a long time coming getting to this point. This evening, we're going to have two presentations on the rewrite of the city zoning ordinance as directed by City Council. The first one, and these actually lead one into the other, but the first one we'll talk about is our replacement zoning for the D2 form-based code. That was one of the first areas of the city that the City Council was initially concerned with the zoning that got put in place back in 2010. And so we will walk through what the proposed changes are for the D2, how we got to that point, and try to answer any questions or take any comments you may have as we go forward. So that will go to the next slide. Just as a reminder, for those people who are not aware of this, the planning department, the city staff does not have unilateral authority to initiate zoning code amendments. We must have amendments initiated either by the planning commission or by City Council. And as you can see here, this is the City Council resolution from February of 2017, which initiated the rewrite of the zoning ordinance. And you can see the arrow pointing there to item number 3, and that was repealing and replacing the D2 form-based code provisions applicable to the uptown area of the city. So among the other 5 things that go with this item number 3 in the resolution, this was the directive to city staff to work on process of replacing the D2 form-based code. Next slide, please. Council may remember telling us to blow up the code back in the time and blow up the D2. There was a number of negative comments coming back about what was going on in that district, and I think a lot of that had been somewhat delayed during the recession. We had relatively low development interest across Hampton Roads, in fact, across the state and the country, and this district was no different from that. But as the recession began to get in the rearview mirror and people started looking again at development opportunities, we started seeing a lot of dissatisfaction with the strict regulations of the D2 district, and where City Council was made aware of that by the different property owners and developers who were trying to work within that area. Identified that form-based code in that district was simply the wrong tool to encourage growth and development. And as you may also recall, at that time we were in the process of working on the Build One Portsmouth comprehensive plan, and we were able to use our consultant team there from McBride Dale Clarion, MDC, to assist us in doing what we would call a small area plan of the area covered by the D2 district, so we could try to put together some sort of an organized approach to looking at the zoning and then coming up with an appropriate zoning plan to move forward with for City Council consideration. Next slide, please. And once again, for kind of a final reminder of this form-based code. Form-based code is not on individual parcels, as is the more traditional zoning. This is a street frontage-based zoning approach. The different colors on the map there just indicating the different type of land use, building frontage, and all of that being tied back to very prescriptive design standards. Some of this was future plan oriented, some of this was current, and it just was not a very successful transition from the prior to 2010 zoning to this. And therefore, again, council wanted to move to more traditional zoning so we can get back into the regulation where we're separating land uses by more traditional zoning districts. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, working through the process with MDC, we began doing a land use study. This study, by the way, is available on the Planning Department's webpage for anyone who'd like to go back and look at the land use study that was done back in 2017 during this time. And as a result of looking at the land uses at the time, where we were in terms of the comprehensive plan development, the Build One Portsmouth plan, ultimately we ended up with a layout that looks as you see on the screen here, this map, which is taking that D2 district and then putting it into 4 different traditional zoning districts. One thing I would mention, just to give you an idea of the scale of this project, this is about 250 acres. There's 541 parcels of land contained within this district, so it's quite a monumental challenge to try to organize this. And one of the things that began to become apparent to everyone in the part of this process was the differences in the land uses we have on the 3 major parallel corridors that run through the district there between London Boulevard, High Street, and County. And so the zoning in many ways is aligning itself with the land uses that have developed along those 3 primary corridors. And then as you move west of the Martin Luther King Expressway, you do see some of the traditional light industrial uses that were predominant in this area back in the earlier days of development in this district out here. This map has been shown basically to City Council on a couple of different occasions, both in work session format, and we also, I believe, showed this to City Council during the rezoning for the Wawa property, which actually took a portion of the Wawa property out of the form-based code district and put it into the traditional zoning there down at Effingham. And so we have shown this map basically to council a couple of times, and from getting to this point with the proposed map, we then move forward to share with the property owners, especially the ones that have been involved in the land planning process, what was being proposed from the zoning standpoint. And from that, we conducted a planning department virtual town hall with the property owners back on October the 21st. Next slide, please. So on the town hall meeting, we actually sent mailed out invitations to all the property owners out there to make sure they're aware of the opportunity. We also used the city's normal procedures for getting meeting notices out to the public to let them know we were having this. This was done using the virtual Microsoft Teams format as we were using here tonight. We allowed people to join the meeting, call into the meeting. We had a good discussion with a number of property owners who were quite interested in what was going out there, and the feedback we were getting was positive. And as you can see on that slide, and there's a link down there that shows the recording of that town hall meeting, which is also posted on the planning department's webpage if someone would like to go back and take a look at our town hall meeting. Based on some of the feedback, we made a couple of minor map adjustments. We went back and took a look at a couple of places in the map where we became aware that from the initial date the map had been developed, we had a little bit of development that had dictated that make some slight adjustments to the map, generally along the perimeter of the district. And so with that, we have the map that's being processed through this rezoning process we're in today. Next slide, please. One of the more interesting things that came out during the course of this review really related back to a question I was asked back in around 2013 or 2014, and at the time with the Martin Luther King extension project and with the new tunnel projects, the question was asked about whether or not this area out here that's now being looked at for this replacement for the form-based code did we see any renewed development potential that might come about as a result of the new road improvements. And at the time, it was hard to find a lot of positives. You may recall, in addition to the tolls that were on the Midtown and downtown tunnels, the actual Martin Luther King Expressway was a tolled facility. The original concept of that actually had a toll on it. When we looked at the traffic analysis done by VDOT for the project, we noticed that their traffic volumes were actually lower on some of our city streets where there were undeveloped or underdeveloped properties in the corridor. They were still mostly in private hands. A lot of the old vacant buildings were still there. And we were still in a recession or just really crawling out of recession. So there wasn't a whole lot of positive going on then. But in recent years, there's been a large number of things that have changed. And one of the things we've become aware of is that what we consider a significant opportunity here for this portion of town, and that would be to develop it in what we'd refer to as an innovation district. And one of the things we're proposing with this zoning is to create this area into an innovation overlay district. And this will be an overlay district to be, again, superimposed over these new districts. It's really intended to be a collaborative planning effort between the property owners and the businesses, residents, and the city as we go back and do a more specific plan. We take a look at those corridors. Again, I mentioned the London Boulevard, High Street, County Street corridor, and with the notion here being that we this is what we call a place-based urban development strategy with the goal to regenerate what we consider an underperforming area into a desirable location for innovative and creative companies and workers. And of course, there's been a fair amount of civic investment out here. Norcom High School, we have social services building, behavioral health care. We also know we have the Hampton Roads Community Health Center coming along in the future. So there's been a fair amount of development out there. And we've also seen a lot of activity by the city's Economic Development Authority, acquiring some of these underperforming properties and really creating some renewed opportunity, and we think some pretty interesting opportunities for this portion of the city. Next slide, please. So we're looking at this as a possible innovation overlay district. We started looking at, what are the assets out here? I mentioned before, we didn't see a lot of assets 5 or 6 years ago, but now we see a whole number of things out here. The city council's focus on this future fiber ring will bring high-speed internet service to this portion of town. That's a real exciting opportunity there. You do have a location that's very close in proximity to downtown. It's obviously very close to both our local and regional port system. In recent months, we've seen the Port Authority sign agreements with the Ørsted Offshore Wind Energy Investment Project. That's, of course, a major state and regional initiative to get involved in the offshore wind energy development. And of course, Ørsted will be located right at Portsmouth Marine Terminal. And I go back to about 2015, that property, in those days, the Port Authority was almost in the process of shutting down. And now they've got this major initiative to get involved in offshore wind energy. Obviously, that's a major new change and very, very close to this district. Again, we mentioned the public investment, mentioned there's available land, and again, I think there's just a real opportunity here to take this property out of that form-based code zoning, which has been really restrictive, and move the development forward in a new and different way, and in a way that's based on a collaborative effort with the city and the property owners and residents and businesses within the district. Next slide, please. And I'll just kind of walk over a few of these things we consider potential benefits of determining this is an acceptable location for an innovation overlay district. Number one, it would provide that framework for desired redevelopment and land use. As we mentioned, you got a fair number of vacant parcels or underdeveloped parcels in there. So you want to create a proper framework for redeveloping where you can. One of the most important things that has come out from a lot of the discussions is this portion of the city really lacks a clear sense of identity. This is an opportunity to create a vision for inclusive growth in this area, and to make it a place that people are aware of and know what it is without trying to kind of guess what part of town you're talking about. We certainly believe this is a way to facilitate generation of accessible jobs to people who live in the area or near the area. Again, contributing to economic growth. And one other thing, providing educational and skill training opportunities for Portsmouth residents. And mentioned, of course, you've got the Norcom High School within the district. You've got a number of higher level education facilities within just a few minutes away, whether it be Norfolk State, Old Dominion, TCC, or out at the Tri-Cities Center area out there in Churchland off of the Route 164 Western Freeway. Next slide, please. So I'm taking a step back now. I've given you the overview of what the zoning proposed is for the area. This concept of doing an innovation overlay district. We thought we'd just take a moment just to help you get oriented and kind of walk through a little bit closer view of the replacement D2 zoning for this area. And by the way, we would be recommending that the nomenclature of calling this D2 be dropped, and then ultimately when we do this innovation overlay district, if council determines wants to proceed that way, we would like to do what they call a placemaking strategy out there to help create a sense of identity and make this a real place. Instead of just calling it the D2, we ought to give this a proper and recognizable name that people can be aware of when you mention where that is in town. So again, starting out on the western edge of what's in the district, again, out by where the Martin Luther King Expressway is, you can see that light industrial section and in the purple or lavender color out there, and that's pretty consistent with the land use out there. Quite frankly, that's fairly consistent for the pre-2010 zoning that was in a lot of this district. If you go back even before the form-based code was established, there's a lot of light industrial use, or at least zone property, contained within this area. Next slide, please. Moving a little bit further in, this is the area around Norcom High School. There's a number of civic buildings that are out there. Here you can see the arrow is pointing to a residential area that's been identified for residential zoning. And then the remainder of that, mostly where it's fronting along the High Street corridor, you see that neighborhood mixed use. That's a mixed use district that allows a combination of kind of residential scale commercial and of various types of residential along that corridor, and a little bit of a lighter scale than what you might get in a general mixed use district and a more intensive commercial zoning district. And then again, as you move south of Norcom down there, again, we have that NMU zoning down there to do a couple things. Number one, trying to avoid a lot of the non-conforming issues we had with the form-based code, where you have residential properties down there and not turning them into non-conforming uses down there. And also, again, because of the value of the mixed use concept of that neighborhood mixed use, creating some new mixed use light commercial office type development opportunities along that corridor. Next slide, please. Again, you see we're moving further down. This is along that High Street corridor. Again, the neighborhood mixed use along High Street. You can see just above that, to the east of where Norcom High School is, along London Boulevard, you can see general mixed use abutting that portion of the neighborhood mixed use proposed zoning. And you also cross London by the cemetery. See those two small purple parcels. One of those you rezoned recently, you may recall, to get out of the form-based code into a light industrial zone. So we're recognizing that previous council action and the compatibility of the parcel next to it with the same type of zoning. Next slide, please. And then finally, as you move towards move more towards downtown, you see up along that London Boulevard corridor, that area that's proposed for general mixed use. Obviously along that corridor, those are all the kind of land uses you'd expect to find in the general mixed use up there. You've got a variety of restaurants, fast food restaurants, a shopping center, different levels of commercial up in that area. So this, again, when the plan was worked on with MDC, it became pretty apparent. This is really an auto-centric general mixed use kind of a district. And rather than trying to fight that, as the form-based code was trying to do, this was actually sort of recognizing the nature of this corridor and trying to take advantage of the district, as opposed to trying to modify it into something that it's just not naturally intended to be. Next slide. And then here, you also see some County Street corridor properties. Again, we had noted the three transportation corridors running east and west through that district. This is one, of course, on the southern side of County Street, and it's kind of an interesting corridor. It's obviously a lighter scale road than if you're up on High Street or London, a lower intensity. But you also have a mix down there of residential uses, and then as you begin to get closer towards Turnpike Road and along the railroad back on there, we have some, again, old traditional light industrial just to the west of where Westbury sits. And so here, once again, we're recognizing a light industrial, not a heavy industrial use in that area. And again, you can see that neighborhood mixed use where there's a sizable number of residential properties that remain there and would be a permitted use in this concept, as opposed to making them non-conforming. Next slide. So one of the things we wanted to look at, we were taking this up, what does this mean for the property owners? And as we've discussed with City Council in prior work sessions, one of the biggest issues that happened with that form-based code, in addition to creating a zoning concept that was very different from what the historic land uses have been, and quite a challenge with the prescriptive nature of the design standards. A lot of the property became non-conforming as people were emerging out of the recession and having a hard time coming up with uses of their property that were going to be permitted under the zoning without requiring them to tear down and start over. And that was creating a lot of heartburn from the property owners, and I know they were expressing that to City Council. In this case, what we're attempting to do is trying to make sure the property owners that are out there today are not going to be put in a situation where they can't continue with what they've been doing. We'll discuss in the next presentation some of the changes we're proposing in the city's non-conforming regulations, but we think this will actually help property owners reinvest as opposed to walk away from some of their properties out there because of the high cost of redevelopment. That rewrite was going to give some processes to allow people to even expand non-conforming uses. It's one of the things we decided in this process with our zoning ordinance and including the D2. By changing the ordinance today, the change you had back in 2010, and a bit of an abnormality to most localities zoning ordinances, we have really expanded the number of things that turned up into non-conforming uses or somehow impacted by some sort of non-conformity to the zoning ordinance. And so we have worked to try to minimize the impact of that and to provide options and opportunities for property owners to request the ability to use their property rather than being just hitting the stone wall of you have to tear it down and start over. And so we think that'll be a really important tool to use in this D2 form-based code area as well. And so finally, as we mentioned, that we, after going through that process and having the town hall meeting, a number of people have since called in since we've advertised this for planning commission public hearing. People are just really curious about what the changes might be for their individual properties. We've received very positive comments. People are, I think, looking forward to getting out of the form-based code. And we believe in working with the city's economic development department on the innovation zone concept and the plan and the innovation overlay district and the plan we would need to do and working on the placemaking strategy, that you've got a real opportunity here to transform this district and really take advantage of a lot of positive aspects that have not really been that positive for the area in the past. Next slide. So future steps, this really is dependent on what City Council ultimately elects to do. Assuming that D2 district is rezoned and the innovation overlay district concept be adopted, again, we would coordinate the development innovation district master plan and a placemaking strategy. And as we promised the property owners during the town hall meeting, we would make sure this is as inclusive, as collaborative as we can possibly do. This is not going to be a top-down dictated master planning effort. These innovation districts to work really require ownership and buy-in from the property owners and the businesses out there. And so we'd be committed working with economic development to making sure that happens. And then once that's done, we would come back for City Council, obviously, with the plan and any modifications might be necessary to the zoning to determine anything. And we would also be looking for some likely public investments in some of the infrastructure out there. So maybe some beautification, maybe a small park or something of that nature to help highlight the changes that would be taking place in this area. Next slide. And again, as we've been telling people over and over, we're trying to be as transparent as we can be in this process, making sure the information is available. All of our presentations, proposed code amendment, the maps are all available on the planning department's virtual webpage. Julie Chop and Meg Pittenger have been receiving calls and email inquiries. People who've been interested in it. We're continuing to do that, and we will continue to do that moving forward to make sure that the planning department is there to assist people with any questions they might have about their zoning, and in particular with the changes that would take place if City Council elects to change the zoning in the way we have proposed to you this evening. And with that, I think I will stop talking and be glad to take any questions City Council may have, any input you would like to provide. I'll just let you know from the scheduling standpoint, this rezoning of the D2 district is scheduled to go to Planning Commission next Tuesday. And it is on schedule to come to City Council on the 24th of November. One of the goals being from the beginning of this process, try to get this all completed during this calendar year. And as you know, zoning items that go before city council require 2 readings. And so this would come back to city council for second reading at your meeting on December the 8th. Now, if we stay on that schedule, then the D2 form-based code would go away, and on December the 8th, you would create a new district for this part of town.
Very good. A very good briefing. Any questions from council? I see Councilwoman Simmons. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you. I was just going to say, Bob, I feel like I've been waiting for this forever, and it was worth the wait. And I'm so pleased that we've gotten this far. And frankly, I know you're using the term uptown for that area, and I love that term. I think that is, to me, that's a cool notation of an area that's uptown, and I like that. So just want to vote for uptown.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yes, Mayor.
Yes. Councilman Glover, you have the floor.
I don't know if you can see me on the screen, but
I
just
can't.
wanted to take
There
just
you
wanted
are.
to take just wanted to take a moment to say to Director Baldwin and his staff, this is exciting stuff. I particularly like the idea of the innovation overlay. It's going to bring some new exciting businesses to Uptown, as Elizabeth stated, and that is exciting. It's encouraging to know that you guys are really being collaborative and inclusive in bringing the business owners on board. And I like the schedule that we're going to implement going forward and making sure that we get much input so that we can get this as right as we can. So not really a question, but a real thank you to you and your team for putting in the work and putting in the time and bringing us a product like this. Exciting times.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Do not let this slow down. This is a great, great plan. And thank you, Mr. Pace, and thank you, Bob, for all the work that you've done and your staff to bring back a great proposal for council's consideration. We're ready to move on to our next item, which is the new zoning rewrite. Mr. Pace.
Sir, Mayor, Mr. Baldwin will also lead this discussion. Mr. Baldwin.
Thank you once again. I apologize for having to listen to me for so much tonight, but I know this is something City Council's been going along with what Councilman Simmons had been waiting for a long time. We've been working very hard on getting this rewrite done. Again, this is on the same schedule that the D2 district is on. We just mentioned to you that the intent would be for that D2 district to get approved prior to the zoning ordinance being done, since we're going to be rolling it right into the new ordinance, and we would have a seamless integration of the new D2 into the new zoning ordinance. And with that, we will walk you through the work we've been doing on the zoning ordinance. Most of this, we just want to make sure we are checking in with council that we hit all the things you had told us you were interested in. I've shown you the resolution from the beginning, all the things about streamlining and simplifying. I can tell you we would have this in one book. This is not 5 or 6. Starting off with that point, because I know that was an issue we have raised from the beginning. So with that, we will begin to walk through the zoning ordinance rewrite presentation for you tonight. Next slide, please. This ought to give you a kind of a quick example. This is a before and after kind of a shot. What you see on the left-hand side of the screen, that's the breakdown of what the zoning ordinance looks like today, and you can see the additional regulatory documents that are listed on the bottom of that list over there. That's our the D1 smart code for downtown, the D2 form-based code, and on and on and on. All those things have design standards or zoning concepts in them that we have to refer to. What you see what the new ordinance is going to look like is the one that's on the right-hand side, our new 40.2, and you can see it's going to be in 6 basic sections, which I think will be a lot easier, these articles, for people to find their way through than what we have currently. Certainly hope so. Next slide. Won't spend too much time on this. This is just really, we're going to walk through the ordinance since you haven't had a full briefing what the new layout looks like. And I know we're not trying to train you all to be zoning administrators. We want to make sure you kind of see what we've done here. So this is, we'll go article by article. This is Article 1. It's kind of the basic purpose intent of the regulations. It's really not a lot different from what's in the current ordinance in terms of organizational structure, but it's a lot clearer to read and I think a lot more organized, and we've gotten rid of, as it's implied here, a lot of the superfluous wording, a lot of the just jargon. We've tried to work very hard as much as we can to get rid of as much jargon as possible, recognizing it's a legal document and there's not so much we can do, but we've tried to simplify it, make it easier for people to walk their way through the structure of the ordinance. Next slide, please. This is showing you the zoning district table, and the whole point of showing you this one is to show the integration of our districts into a single table type, where before you had different appendices for the D1 or for the D2, and of course here we got the historic sub-districts in here. So really the purpose is just to show you we have integrated all of the zoning districts into a single table. Next slide. This is about the establishment of zoning districts, and again, we're just going to try to hit some of the highlights. We've made quite a number of minor modifications in there, which we obviously won't go over bit by bit. We're going to hit the highlights in here. A few things you'd be interested in. We did separate the business district into commercial and industrial. I think people have been confused by referring to things as a business district in the ordinance, because I think most people aren't thinking industrial when they think of a business district. There was a district they referred to as these activity center districts. Those were actually based off the 2005 comprehensive plan. That plan has since been replaced with the new Build One Portsmouth, and that concept of activity centers did not survive the new plan. We've removed that concept, even though those were never applied anywhere, but that was provided for in the 2010 ordinance. We've modified some zoning names just to be more appropriate in terms of density from high to medium. That PG district, that's your public preservation, public government buildings. It's a very unusual mix between things that are being preserved and then government buildings. They really aren't the same thing, and so we've turned that district into a conservation district, which is really what that section's intended. And then we've just taken the concept here of recognizing that local government land uses are permitted through the regular use table, and clearly state and federal government uses, they're not under our zoning authority, so there was really no need to spend so much time trying to deal with them in the zoning ordinance. Next slide, please. In the downtown, one of the things we had done about 5 years ago, we had one of our student interns actually did a density analysis of downtown. We were always confused why the density seemed so low in our downtown districts, and her assessment clearly showed that what was in our zoning as being permitted and what's on the ground is existing don't match up at all. And a little bit more digging at the time led us to realize that the densities have been done as a distribution of a market analysis done in 2009. It was basically a 10-year distribution of residential units downtown, which is not what I would consider a normal way to do a zoning density concept here. So we have modified those, and the numbers you see in the blue and the rewrite are really much more reflective of what's on the ground in the different sub-districts of downtown, as opposed to what was in the market analysis from 2009. And what happened in 2009, they were putting so many units actually in the T6 based on the market analysis that the spread of what was left over ended up with these very low densities in the other sub-districts, which was really not, again, consistent with what's on the ground out there today. Next slide. This is your downtown design area. we are proposing to put that into an overlay district. Really no change of any substance being proposed here. One of the challenges we've come across is at the time that the work was done in 2010, there were a number of different lines shown on a map, one of them being the area that's under the jurisdiction of the Downtown Design Committee. Other ones were historic areas and other things. And we just found administratively between property owners and staff, there was just a sort of ongoing confusion about where the boundaries are. You can see it's this is not a a rectangular or a box. It's a kind of an interesting boundary line. So what we wanted to do is put it in an overlay district just so we can clarify the map and make it clear to people where the district is and where it isn't. And so again, no substantive changes made to the regulations in here, just creating the overlay district so we can get it properly affixed to the city zoning map. Next slide, please. We just went over this earlier. This is the proposed zoning for your D2 district. And so we'll go to the next slide since we've covered that. Here's another item the council's been involved in recently that's been incorporated into this article. It's your new entertainment overlay district. This you just recently approved. It's the area in which the casino, proposed casino, would have to rezone and overlay to go on top of the zoning that they are currently have in process to move the Victory Village property to MUH. So this is the overlay district, and as we advised council during the that code amendment, it will require a use permit for the casino itself and the overlay district, since it's more than just a casino, since it's a full entertainment overlay district, must be a minimum of 25 acres in size, and it would be created through rezoning and the submission of a master plan by an applicant. Next slide. This is again back into these use definitions, one of our kind of standard elements of the zoning ordinance, and we just mentioned go through here that we've tried to condense and simplify and streamline and separate uses into principal, accessory, and temporary uses. All of these things, just trying to improve the organization, the readability, and then I just want to point out that last bullet, since I heard about this for many years, the fact that we did not have ports or port facilities in our zoning ordinance, and want to make council aware it is now going to be an item within the warehouse and freight movement subcategory, and so port facilities will now be an item within the city's zoning ordinance. Next slide. This is one of those issues we'd be looking for council to potentially give us feedback on. We've had sort of ongoing questions about the definition that is used for entertainment establishments. Entertainment establishments are a use permit type of use. Many of them are downtown. You can see the definition that's in place on the left. Really, the biggest difference you see between the one on the left and the right is the one on the left says they may serve alcohol, and the proposed rewritten definition says they possess or plan to apply for an ABC license to serve alcohol. So we've made that more of a mandatory element of being an entertainment establishment. And I like to use the one example. If you had, say, a McDonald's and they had 2 or 3 musicians in there playing banjos, that would trigger our current entertainment establishment use permit. I don't think that's what City Council had in mind when they started regulating these types of businesses in the first place. We know the general issues you have in terms of potential impacts on surrounding property owners tend to be when you have this live element of whether it be music or disc jockeys or karaoke, whatever it is. And then you also add that alcohol into the mix, and that tends to be the mixture that creates more of the issues that would dictate, at least in staff's opinion, the need to create the revised entertainment establishment definition. And that's really staff recommendation, and certainly up to City Council if you like that proposed change. Otherwise, we would leave it as it's currently defined. Next slide, please. We did go through our use table at some length. In fact, City Council, I don't remember the exact date, we did a work session exercise going through our use table. We've gone through the staff level ourselves. We've reevaluated the uses to make sure the districts make sense, that the uses are properly laid out in there. We've added the casino gaming establishment. One of the things we discovered that the city's light industrial and heavy industrial zoning districts were almost identical in the way the use table is set up. So we've refined that a bit just to make it clear the difference between being in a light industrial zoning district and a heavy industrial zoning district. Another one of those things council had asked us to do, take a look at eliminating the use permit requirement for multifamily residential downtown. As you can see on the fourth bullet there, we would be proposing no use permit in the D1, T4, T5, and T6 sub-districts. That's your primary higher intensity districts downtown. City Council also asked us to take a look at convenience stores with gasoline pumps. And based on that assessment, while it's permitted in a number of different zoning districts, we concluded that the concept of eliminating the use permit would make sense in the general mixed use. That'd be the one addition to the list on the slide there. We would still want where the neighborhood mixed use, for example, allows that type of use to keep a use permit requirement there, because a lot of those are much more impactful on nearby residential. But we did go forward with the eliminating the use permit requirement in the general mixed use, which is typically where we see the applications. And then finally, one of those that might be of interest to you tonight when you look at your regular agenda, we would be eliminating the use permit requirement for drive-throughs citywide. Of course, you have 3 applications on your agenda tonight at 7 for use permits for drive-throughs. Based on what's being proposed, and again, from the direction we received from council, proposed no drive-through use permits in the revised ordinance. Next slide, please. One of the elements we have in our zoning ordinance we call use-specific standards. That's where a lot of the prescriptive development standards that were causing so much problem are located. We've gone through that, and we've attempted to remove, to the greatest extent possible, the what we considered overly prescriptive or unnecessary standards. We've tried to refine and simplify the standards that remained in there. And again, one of the major changes in here, again from council direction, was to eliminate what we call distance separators. There's 25 to 30 of them in the existing zoning ordinance. We have a couple of examples you can see here. One talks about a warehouse use shall be located at least 500 feet from a residentially zoned district, school, or daycare. And quite frankly, you're running out of locations in Portsmouth to have a warehouse based on that distance separator. The other one, back on our earlier conversation about entertainment establishments, we currently have a 250-foot distance separation requirement for an entertainment establishment from group living, daycare, an education facility, a hospital, or religious institution. This has become an issue downtown with different applications that have been proposed. So I believe we've had since 2015 somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 or 15 different Board of Zoning Appeals applications, people looking for relief from these distance separators. And it has really been one of the most restrictive items in our zoning ordinance in terms of impacting a variety of development that's been proposed throughout the city. Just mentioned earlier the entertainment establishment use standards, the use permit being revised. And one other thing that's in here, vending uses or renewable energy. We've had a couple of issues with ice machines, and I'll just kind of get into little things that may not seem like a major land use, but we've had ice machines that have been put on top of easements, city water line easements, for example. And because they weren't regulated, they weren't going through a normal permitting process to be looked at to make sure they weren't doing that. So we put in some minimal standards in there just so we can to vet these uses and make sure that they are not being placed on top of again, some sort of a utility type easement. And we've added some standards, renewable energy becoming a much more important aspect of our land use regulations moving forward. Also as part of our Build One Portsmouth focus on, some of our more sustainable, resilient aspects of land use going forward. So we do have some new renewable energy uses standards added into the ordinance. Next slide, please. This is an area I think a lot of people have expressed interest in. This is a place where City Council has been involved in a patch or two. These are the area bulk density and setback standards. We did go back and review all the dimensional requirements for the different lots, the lot widths. We took a look at council's directives when you did the patch, and we believe we made the appropriate modification, pretty much just making permanent what was done in the patch for the most part, and trying to eliminate the ease of taking an existing single lot and cutting it into two, which was what was going on under the pre-patched zoning ordinance. So we think we've got the proper lot sizes matched up now into the permanent code. And then the last thing mentioned on this page, one of the things we're beginning to run into, and we have a couple of examples in Portsmouth. You see a number of these in Norfolk where buildings have been raised. Obviously, across the street, Harbor Vista Apartments is known. Those are built on top of parking structures. Talking about buildings that are being elevated because they're in a flood zone, and we've modified our height allowances in there. So in the event you need to raise your building up to get out of a flood zone, we provide that height allowance without mandating someone get a variance to do that. Next slide, please. Kind of quickly moving along here, council's aware we revised the our parking standards a few years ago. We've done a few minor modifications in here. I just point out that fourth bullet down there, the curbside pickup. This is really a sort of a ongoing COVID-19 and probably post-COVID-19 concept where we have a lot of restaurants and businesses moving to curbside pickup. And we wanted to recognize what's going on out in the development industry out there and make sure we've got our standards in there so that we at least protect fire lanes and handicap parking and things of that nature, make it clear where the curbside pickup locations can be added and the types of places where they cannot go. And then one last thing, the alternative parking plan. Even though we revised parking a few years ago, on occasion, specific uses have different parking needs. And so we just clarified the processes by which they can come in and request some modifications to parking requirements through the existing zoning ordinance. Next slide. Our landscape and screening, same kind of concept, again, trying to simplify how we calculate the requirements, clarifying terminology, incorporating our tree protection requirements. And then one of those things we came across, the Chapter 36, one of those things that we do find on occasion where there are zoning type regulations in other chapters of the city code, and we happen to come across the tree canopy subsections in Chapter 36. So we've moved that over into the landscaping section here. And then again, with the graphics being removed, the confusing graphics that were not being very helpful have been removed. And I will make a note, as council's aware, and we'll talk about it at the end of this presentation here. We will be working on a user's manual for zoning, so the graphics that were sprinkled throughout the current zoning ordinance will be put into a proper user's manual, one that we can update and maintain with a lot more ease than the current zoning ordinance can be. Next slide, please. A couple simple things. Going through our fencing requirements. We do have we've had a number of issues causing confusion with property owners and how we administer our fencing requirements. And so we've just tried to clarify how the fencing section works. And we think that we've just made it much more simple for people to read how the fencing regulations are applied. And I just mentioned this question comes up, as I think most council members are aware, we do not require building permits for most fences, but they do need to get zoning clearance. So we do have zoning standards for them. Next slide, please. A couple of things we've also recognized. We came to the conclusion that some of our lighting standards we have in our zoning code were a little bit overly restrictive. And so we just made some modest modifications to maintain our situation where people aren't flooding neighbor properties or flooding the street with lights as we see in some of our other communities around us, but to give a little bit more flexibility in there so it's not quite so difficult for lighting designers to meet our city code and provide appropriate level of lighting as necessary. And we will note a couple things in here. We've had some questions about the fact that the current ordinance does not allow uplighting. We have made some modifications to allow uplighted buildings in the downtown area, entertainment overlay district, and the innovation district. They all have some options in there for doing some decorative uplighting of buildings and trying to improve the kind of the overall appearance of the city from a lighting standpoint. Next slide. Again, as you're aware on the signage, we made major modifications following the lawsuit in Arizona that went to the U.S. Supreme Court. One of the things we had to do, we had to go back through the sign terminology that was being used in the D2 district and make sure we were consistent with the sign terminology we're using the rest of the city. And we did add a sign type in there, these outdoor advertising signs, which were not in the current ordinance. And we also recognize in here that some of these outdoor advertising signs can be contain electronic lighting displays, which had not been the case in the past. Next slide. I'll go very quickly through here. We just had some open space set-asides that were larger than we believe were necessary, and so we just streamlined this and made the open space standard 10%. I believe the current standard is 15%. This really applies to residential developments. Next slide. There was a section in our current code. It was called green building incentives. The incentives weren't very good. The requirements weren't very clear. Wasn't really sure what we were trying to accomplish from them, so we rewrote this section. Again, following up on our Build One Portsmouth resilient concept here. So we've now have resilient site and building bonuses, which for really clear resilient building designs. For example, adding solar panels. There is some ability if you reach the correct thresholds to get some modest building size or density enhancements for applying these resilient site design concepts. Next slide. And there's one section I did want to speak a bit to council on. This is on nonconformities. For those of you who've been dealing with zoning for a long time, you know the general concept of a non-conforming use or structure in zoning ordinances to make it go away. And so most ordinances do not allow property owners to modify, to do too much investing in it, to expand it. And quite frankly, in our situation, we just run into this problem quite a bit. And we think it's really been to the detriment of the city in terms of people being able to reinvest into their property. And so we've proposed some relaxing of our non-conforming non-conforming standards, and allowing a special exception process for people to come and request some modifications to their non-conforming structure. Currently, you really don't have an option to do that, but we think that's really appropriate to allow people to make a case for reinvesting in their particular use or their particular property. And the last thing, you may be aware of the non-conforming site aspect requirements. These were one of our most problematic, in my opinion, non-conforming requirements, and this would start to trigger doing all sorts of modifications to a property, depending on how much a property owner was investing in or in renovating a building, and to the point where people were backing off on proposed renovations to avoid triggering the non-conforming site aspect requirements. And so we just eliminated those. We just don't think they really serve much of a purpose other than being a redevelopment detriment. And so we think we have other mechanisms in place to do the kind of things we're looking at in terms of screening and things of that nature without the highly prescriptive and very expensive mandated non-conforming site aspect requirements. And so we think that's going to have a pretty significant effect on, again, based on council's direction, making it the city a much better place for investment and for people to reinvest in their businesses and properties. Next slide. This, again, most of the stuff is for the staff, just cleaning up the administrative stuff, simplifying our use permit and rezone review standards, making it very clear the role of the zoning administrator instead of being scattered all through the ordinance as it is today. We're proposing to move from criminal to civil penalties. All the localities pretty much around Hampton Roads have already done that, finding it's better for trying to get compliance is really what you're trying to get. And again, following up on what we've been doing with COVID-19, really been moving the planning and zoning department to a much more electronic submission and review concept, less paper handling. And we think we made a pretty aggressive transition following the March 13th declaration of emergency. We just continue to work to improve the way we do things electronically, including, as we mentioned this evening, our virtual town hall meetings and other virtual meetings like with the Planning Commission, et cetera. Next slide. Special exceptions. We've discussed this with council at work sessions before. There is a process that's allowed under the Virginia Code. Special exceptions are, in essence, the equivalent of a conditional use permit, but generally not rising to the level of review that would call for city council. One thing about a special exception, they go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, so an applicant can get an answer to their question in a much shorter time frame than going through our typical use permit process through the Planning Commission, City Council. So we've got a few new special exception uses that have been built into the proposed ordinance. One would be alternative signage, an alternative signage plan. And I just mentioned in the current ordinance, we actually had an initial concept of that using the Planning Commission. That's been deemed not legal by another state Supreme Court case. And so you have to get to a body that does have actually authority to make these decisions. So the alternative signage plan, alternative parking plan, and again, that discussion we had on the expanding non-conforming uses, structures, et cetera, through the Board of Zoning Appeals as a special exception. And that would also allow the attachment of conditions, et cetera, like you would do with a use permit. Next slide. Site plans, I know that's always an interesting topic of discussion. We've been working to try to clear up the confusion caused in the 2010 ordinance by the Type 1 and Type 2 site plan, which are inconsistently defined and used in the current ordinance. And we've simplified this into 3 different site plan types: a major site plan, a minor site plan, and then what we call a single family site plan. That's obviously self-explanatory what that third item is. And one of the things we've done, we've eliminated this joint engineering department, planning department sign off on site plan approvals, and the ordinance will give that authority to the city engineer so that we can, again, streamline our review and approval process and just make it easy for us to administer that whole site plan process. If you're curious, the difference between those two site plans, major site plan basically would be 2,500 square feet or larger, because that's where you start to trigger erosion sediment control requirements that need to be addressed by the engineering department. Next slide. Finally, we get to the section of definitions, our Article 6. We've tried to minimize use of architectural terms that neither the staff nor the public is familiar with. Again, we try to revise the definitions to be clear, concise. We try to make sure they're consistent throughout the ordinance. We're trying to use the same term for the same thing, no matter where you find it in the ordinance. We've also created some hyperlinks to help people move electronically from one section to another. And then from my earlier discussion about the port use, we have also put that in the definition section. Next slide. So it's a kind of a quick run through all of the changes in the ordinance. I've got a draft copy of it myself. I can tell you it's 330 pages. The next steps we would lay out here would be, assuming City Council moves forward with the first block on this page, and that's adopting the zoning ordinance. As I mentioned, this is on track to get to City Council on the 24th of November and second reading on December the 8th. We are in the process. We've started the work on the Development Procedures Manual. We've obviously reached a conclusion that we need a user-friendly electronic interactive zoning map, so when people want to look up their zoning, they can find it. And so that's one of our priorities going forward. For coming back towards City Council, we want to work to revamp our planning applications to make them better, more informative, and probably less narrative. We would move forward with that development of the Innovation Overlay District Area Master Plan and placemaking strategy. And then we'd also like to come back. One of the things we've concluded we need to do is come back and take a look at our D1 district downtown, because so much of the sort of the regulatory concept was sort of threaded throughout a number of different plans. We need to come up with whether or not we need to create some upgraded district standards in the new ordinance. So that would be one more thing we would do. So these are the next sort of major projects we would take on related to the zoning ordinance, assuming City Council moves forward with step number 1 and adopts the new ordinance. Next slide. Once again, we've had this ordinance out for public review and comment. It's been on our webpage in one form or another for several months. We have provided our contact information if people have questions or comments about it, or if they want to go take a look at it. It is sitting again on the planning department's webpage. And with that, we have put some PowerPoint presentation, explanatory PowerPoint presentation, and some additional information for people who are visiting that webpage to help explain some of the things that we've done with the zoning ordinance, and at least give them some resource materials online, since we're operating virtually. And with that, I'll go to the next slide, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Bob, for an excellent presentation. Very comprehensive, very understandable. And you and your staff have picked up the essence of council's concerns throughout this process. And with that, I recognize Vice Mayor Lisa Lucas Burke. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate the information, Mr. Baldwin. It does me well to be able to have heard it for a second time, hearing it from planning. But just have a question about the open space use going from 15% to 10%, and this for residential development. I guess the purpose on us decreasing the amount was to give the developer more developer space, or was it in some other reason? Any particular reason why we decreased that amount, or is it just to help the developer to have more usable space?
Okay, that's a great question. I'd answer it a couple of ways. First of all, yes, one of the things we're trying to do is be consistent across the regulatory requirements. Right now, we have some that are at 15%, some are at 10. There's some places in the code you can actually get your open space requirement off-site if you go somewhere else. It was just not a very easily understood or administered mandate. The other thing, we're just trying to be clear that we know you're going to have a challenge with stormwater. And so almost everyone's going to have some level of open space. And so we try to balance out the ability of developers to have usable open space for this. Again, these apply in residential projects to create some usable residential open space, but while recognizing at the same time the other development challenges they're facing in terms of complying with the state stormwater program. And so a little bit to help the developers, trying to clarify and trying to be very consistent in how it's applied, so there's no question what the requirements are across the ordinance.
Right. And one other thing, two other things, I like that we removed the criminal penalties from that and just made them civil penalties, because we want to encourage business, not discourage business use. And then the last thing, the SAIL app that our Economic Development Authority created, will some of these changes, I mean, I know that they'll have to be worked into it, but will they be updated in that app that was created by our Economic Development Authority?
Well, I have not had that conversation with Mr. Moore, but we'd be glad to do that to see what, if anything, they would like to do to make sure that the people that they are dealing with have access to the latest, most current zoning requirements. And if that's an appropriate approach for them, we'd be more than willing to work with them to share the electronic data.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And the chair recognizes Councilwoman Simmons. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Baldwin, I don't know if you were asking for an opinion I'm going back 30 minutes ago when we were talking about people singing in the parties and McDonald's and the coffee shops where there is no alcohol. That is a welcome change in my mind, because it never made any sense. I don't know if you were looking for an opinion, but I think that's a super idea and long overdue if you were looking for an opinion on that.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. I am looking for some guidance on how council would like us to proceed with that question.
Go forward. Great idea.
Let's pause for a second. I took that no comment by anybody to be concurrence. Does anybody have any problems with that? No one? Councilman Glover?
You were referring to no comment. What was that in reference to again?
To the point that Elizabeth brought up, which was to eliminate the need for conditional use permit for Trio to sing in Hardee's, for example.
A place that doesn't serve alcohol.
Yeah.
That was our creating a hard link between the entertainment establishment and serving of alcohol as the entertainment use permit.
Yeah.
Any disagreement with that? All right, hearing none. I saw, Shannon, you had your hand up. We'll go to you first and followed by Councilman Moody. Yes, sir.
Right. Can you see me? I can't see me on the screen here, but whatever the case is. In any event, I wanted to ask Mr. Baldwin, I may have missed this in the presentation. Will there be any capabilities for citizens or businesses to be able to complete information and documents online or electronic?
Yes, in fact, you remind me of a couple things. First of all, yes, our intentions are to make the planning department as virtual and as electronic as we can be, for a couple of reasons. One, most people are working that way now. Our applications at the present time, they're all fillable PDFs. So if anybody wanted to submit an application today, they can do that. The one thing we've been working on, we're one of the last departments to get capacity to take credit card payments, which we're finishing working on as we speak. So that's been our one kind of holdup. We still have had to have people send us checks, or unfortunately, in some cases, they're sending us cash, which we really don't prefer they do. Yes, the idea would be electronic. Obviously, there are a few things we do that are within the department that we can't do electronically, like a subdivision plat that we have to sign. But for the most part, all the planning and zoning type stuff, applications, staff reports, materials applicants are submitting, that can all be done virtually today. And we're just going to continue to work on streamlining that.
All right. Next is Councilman Moody. And everybody ought to be able to see themselves in the lower right-hand corner of their screen. Councilman Moody, you have the floor.
I can see myself. I don't know that others can see me when I'm raising my hand.
Yeah.
But anyway.
We see you.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. Bob, 2 excellent presentations. At our last meeting, we had a gentleman that spoke to residential development. He actually made a pretty good plea about the lot size, the width, the setback, which, and I'm sure we've probably asked us before, but how are we as compared to other cities regarding that? And I know with that, in saying that, I know that council decided, I guess, over a year ago to reduce that. But are we discouraging development now by doing that in some of the older communities like Craddock?
Well, let me answer that 2 ways. Number one, yes, we went back when City Council did the patch, and we did go through and take a look at the lot size. And at that time, we had in some districts, lot sizes could be as small as 35 feet wide, which was really causing some havoc in some of these older neighborhoods. And one thing about Portsmouth being mostly built out, really the goal is to try to minimize the opportunity for people to take a standard lot and cut it into 2. That really is more of the challenge. And if everybody's sitting on a 6,000 square foot lot or a 7,000 square foot lot, you don't want to start having somebody turn that into 2 3,500 square foot lots. So the modifications that were done with the patch and what's been finalized in this district, I think really addresses that. The lots are pretty much consistent, maybe a little bit smaller than what was originally in the pre-2010 ordinance, but it completely prevents that splitting of lots, which was really the issue that was being raised by the residents, and as was City Council brought that to the staff. So I can tell you, as far as the development activity, our single family site plan process is off the charts this year. We'll have to get you a total number on it, but we're probably going to push 175, 180, maybe more single family site plans this year. Last year we were probably right about 104, 105. And so since the time in which council modified those lot sizes, we really haven't seen a negative impact. We're just seeing an acceleration in single family development.
It would be good to see those numbers at the next opportunity.
We can do that.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, sir. Any other questions? I have a question. Bob, I refer you to page 19 of your presentation, outdoor signs, the billboards. My question is, it wasn't clear, are billboards going to require a conditional use permit regardless of the zone?
Yes, there's a limited zoning in which they're allowed, and they would still be a use permit use.
Good. All right. My next question deals with page 16, which is the community development standards, landscaping and screening, and this is really the landscaping. This doesn't set up the requirement that will lead to a debate that someone picks a pine tree over a cherry tree, will it?
No, sir.
We've had those debates in the past.
No, we will not have that as certainly not a debate if the intention is to comply with our requirements. I'll just say that.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Councilman Paul Battle. Paul, you have the floor, sir. You're muted, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Baldwin, at the last meeting, we had some developers who were complaining about specific lots that were smaller than the standard size needed to build on in particular areas. One of the areas that they were talking about the lots existing in was Printers Park. Now, have the folk in Printers Park stated that they didn't want those particular lot sizes built back out because they were additionally previously held homes on those lots. So what I want to know, are we going to allow those developers that own those lots to build them back out? Is the community giving us a no sign? And would it be kind of abnormal to just have them set and be not a uniform distance between the houses in the area? And could we possibly work with the developers to build back on the areas where that existed if the folk in the community are okay with it?
Well, let me respond to your question this way, Councilman. The way the zoning ordinance works, and as you recall from the presentation at your last council meeting, the discussion was about neighborhoods in which the lots were platted at 25 feet. And then at the time the neighbors were built, developers would come in and purchase however many lots they needed to accommodate the house they wanted. Parkview is another neighborhood built using that same approach where they have 25-foot wide lots, and then typically a builder might buy 2 or 3 or 4 depending how big of a house they're putting on it. We have zoning standards for those neighborhoods that have been in place for 60 or 70 years that establish the minimum lot sizes, and we haven't heard any complaints from the neighborhoods about what their current zoning lot sizes are. What is happening, I think what you're hearing some questions about, is if you happen to have I guess a couple different circumstances. Usually it's related to a provision we have in our zoning code that says if you're under the same ownership, I'll give you an example. If the minimum lot size is 60 feet wide, and I personally own 3 separate lots, I can't build 3 separate houses. I've got one 60-foot wide lot, the way our zoning works. So ownership is what we call that a zone lot. What it says is if you're in the same ownership and you can meet the minimum zoning requirement, you cannot further subdivide your property. And that would be in keeping with what the neighborhood development pattern already is. And on all those lots where there were houses in which the houses have been are going to be redeveloped or torn down or whatever, developers can go right back in. We do allow development of single family, even on non-conforming lots. It's permitted. The real question comes up when you get people where you have multiple lots owned by a single entity, and they want to subdivide it into smaller lots. But as far as the neighborhoods themselves go, they are not overly restricted by these proposals. In fact, the ordinance is very generous to these individual lots if they're owned by individuals.
So they are able to get variances to put what was existing before it was torn down?
In those cases, they would be administratively approved. You don't even need a variance. It would be allowed. All you'd have to do is meet your setback requirements and go through the single family site plan process. But we would allow that. In fact, I just expound for 1 second. One of the changes we made in the code, if you have a non-conforming lot, regardless of the zoning district or use, as long as you can meet your setbacks, you can use your lot. So we're one of the things that's happening in the zoning code is eliminating that inability to use property if the lot is non-conforming.
Thank you so much, Mr. Baldwin.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any other questions? Good. Mr. Baldwin, we're on track to have this before us for its first meeting at the next meeting, and the second reading the first meeting in December. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Again, thank you for this very well done, not only presentation, but draft. We now move to our next item, which is the update on the 2020 census. Mr. Pace.
Yes, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. Mr. Brian Swets will lead us in this presentation of the 2020 census update.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, members of council. Thank you for having me. My name is Brian Swets. I'm a member of the Planning Department. I was one of the city staff members who was working on the 2020 census here in Portsmouth. And I want to give you an update tonight on what we've done over the last, say, year and a half or so, and what's next in the next month and a half for the census. Next slide, please. We came to you back in 2019 to talk about the census, and council told us that the goal was to get 100% of the people in Portsmouth counted. That was our goal as well. We are happy to hear that council was along the same line as we are. And I'm going to tell you how close we got to that goal. Next slide, please. First, as a quick background on the importance of the census, first of all, it's required by the Constitution. It's something that has to be done every 10 years. But on the ground, more importantly, the census is the basis for a lot of government spending allocations, anything from schools to especially social safety net programs like WIC or Medicaid or education, and also political representation. The membership in the House of Representatives and Congress is determined by how many people are counted in the census in each state. So there is the possibility that someone in a state could be close to a threshold where they are undercounted and they actually lose a seat in the House. I believe actually this may be happening in Alabama, and there may be a lawsuit out about that right now. Next slide, please. For a timeline of what we have been up to, I want to break it down into 3 categories. Before the count was started by the Census Bureau, what was happening during the count, and then now that the count is over, what's happening after. The things in blue are things that city staff and the Complete Count Commission have done, and the things in red are things that were primarily the responsibility of the Federal Census Bureau. So before the count, city staff started its pre-planning processes. We met with people from the Census Bureau at the regional level out of Philadelphia to start learning about the census. We also met at the local level with different cities and tried to figure out what is it that we want to do, what have cities done in the past, what has worked and what hasn't, and what kind of things can we do where we can work together and try to pool our resources to do a better job overall. We identified funding sources in fiscal year 19 that was from the planning department. This past fiscal year, it's been mostly from the marketing department. City Council created a Complete Count Commission. This was 16 members and 2 representatives, one from PRHA, one from schools. The idea is that they would use their personal and professional networks to help raise awareness of the census. And the idea was that the Complete Count Commission would be doing the majority of the work and that city staff would be there to support them, not the other way around. Once the Complete Count Commission was created, we started meeting monthly and we put together a plan for what we wanted to do. A lot of our efforts were about raising awareness, and so we went to a lot of different, back when we could do this, we went to a lot of different events and festivals and such, especially around Christmas time, where we were handing out flyers and swag and things to let people know that the census was coming. On the advertising front, since the federal government has a lot more money, they handled a lot of the more expensive advertising, so especially on TV or on larger radio stations. That's the census advertising that you would see there would be from them, whereas things at the local level would be more likely to come from us. During the count, both before COVID and during COVID, the Complete Count Commission has been busy doing giveaways, things like pens, eyeglass cleaners, hand sanitizer was a popular one, as you can imagine. Between those things and flyers, we were constantly giving things away to let people know that the census was coming. Dr. Bracy with the schools was very generous in his efforts in letting, using his superintendent's memos and emails and reverse, kind of 911 calls to let people know that the census was happening and how important it was. We worked with Adams Outdoor Advertising. We put up billboards. I believe we had 6 or 7 on the south side of the city. And a special thanks to our marketing department, especially Sharon Hoggard, who was incredible working through media with us, both social and normal terrestrial media, really getting the word out and reaching a huge number of people. The federal people during the count had 2 main jobs. The first is door knocking. These were enumerators, literally would go and knock on doors for people who had not responded to the census to try to get them to fill it out. Obviously, that wasn't really happening as much because of COVID, both in terms of people who were supposed to be hired deciding not to work because they didn't feel comfortable, and new protocols that the census instituted to figure out how to keep everyone safe. The second was MQAs, which stands for Mobile Questionnaire Assistance. This is where census workers would go in groups to places that they knew there would be large numbers of people. So you might go to, say, a pharmacy or a grocery store, or something like this, say the food giveaways that we had going on. And they would assist people in real time with tablets and such to help them fill out the census if they were interested. Now that the count is over, it is entirely in the Census Bureau's hands. They are evaluating the data. They have statisticians and data scientists who are going through the data that they've gathered to look for inconsistencies or inaccuracies, and they will correct those. And they will put together a final report that is due to the president by December 31st. And at that point, it gets certified, and then we have a census. Now, this is all kind of up in the air. There's a bunch of lawsuits out there right now because of poor counting and other irregularities. So I'm not exactly sure if things will change or if they even can be changed. But we are kind of in flux. As with everything else in 2020, we're kind of flying blind here. Next slide, please. Okay, so the results. As you can see, we did not have as much of a response this year as we did in 2010. This was disappointing even with COVID because we have, for the first time, the ability to respond online as opposed to just mailing it in or calling in. So we were hopeful that we might be able to, overcome the COVID hurdle. Although, from a glass half full perspective, not really having the opportunity to get out in the public, getting pretty close to what we did in 2010, maybe that is a win. When we have 28 census tracts in the city, we saw an increase in the response rate in only 4 of those. 3 of those were in Churchland. This is not to say that there's more people in these census tracts, just that the response rate in those tracts compared to in 2010, only in 4 did we see an increase. And it was a small increase on average, a little bit less than 2%, whereas the average decrease in the response rate was over 6% in the majority of the city. Next slide, please. So we did face a number of challenges. Obviously, COVID has disrupted everything that we've been used to, including the census. Beyond that, there is a general mistrust in government, and it seems to be getting worse. And so people did not feel comfortable giving their information to the census. As an extension of that, a lot of people don't really understand, how does it benefit me? What do I get out of filling out the census? I'm going to talk a little bit about that more in a second. And finally, frankly, we had a very disinterested federal partner. This is difficult to say, but, and I don't want to cast aspersions on people or organizations, but it was hard to get responses from people at the Census Bureau. It was hard to get answers to questions. There was really no desire on their part to collaborate with us, especially in trying to count populations that are traditionally undercounted: children, the homeless, the elderly, minorities. There was, we tried to put some plans and some recommendations in place, but we were really never able to get responses from the Census Bureau on how we could work together. And it was frustrating. It really was. Next slide, please. Okay, finally, lessons learned. What can we take from our experiences this year and translate to 2030 so that we can do better? The first is kind of a broad idea that applies not just to the census, but any sort of public outreach that the city is doing. We have to make sure that what we're doing is convenient for residents, not necessarily for staff. We have to go to where people are, and clearly that's a lot harder during a pandemic, but the spirit of it still holds true. On the census side, I had a phone call last week from someone who worked in the kind of operations and implementation side of the census, and they were laying out to me all of the things that were going wrong. And what I pulled away from it was that they really didn't do anything right, from a lack of leadership to actively undermining, the census by saying that not everyone should count in the census, or that it should be used to identify populations so that they could be arrested and or deported. Their internal processes were designed incredibly poorly. We were not allowed to speak with anyone in the operations or implementation side. We could only speak with their kind of communications people. The communications people were not in contact with the operations people, so no one really knew what they were doing. So anytime we had questions, we couldn't get answers. That also included them. I was told how even their own people wouldn't respond to questions and answers. Their IT systems were outdated and didn't talk, and had a hard time with just straight up losing data. It sounded like just a debacle all the way around on the federal side. Like I said, did the internet help? 44% of the responses were done online. That's way lower than I would have expected, even in a city where people might not have access to either the internet or to computers. I would have thought that would have been a lot easier. I'm actually kind of impressed how many people are still willing to pick up a phone and call and wait on hold to fill something out, or request a mail-in ballot and find a stamp and envelope and send it back. And lastly, one of the kind of frustrating lessons here is that the census provides a really good example of how bias can really get baked into the system. What we would see is that people in hard to count populations have traditionally, not just this year, but in every census are undercounted. And when they're undercounted, the services that they are most likely to take advantage of get underfunded, and they can see that, and it makes them feel like government doesn't care about them. And when they feel like that, then they have no incentive to participate, whether it's in the census or anything else. And it turns itself into a cycle where we turn off large swaths of our community from trusting in us and government. And that's a frustrating thing. So that's where we are and where we were, where we're going. I am happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Any questions from members of council? Yes, sir. Councilman Battle, you have the floor.
Sorry, Councilman, you're muted.
Is the count over with now?
The count is over, although there are still lawsuits outstanding that are trying to figure out if, not that the count can be started again, but what do we do with the fact that we know that the count is way off? I don't know. I have no idea how that's going to play out. I've been wondering, at the federal level, a lot of our laws, when you get down to the weeds, will say something about how the census will be used to determine funding. And I've been wondering if there's going to be some sort of blanket law passed that would look at something slightly different, that building some sort of new model, or building off of what's called the American Community Survey, which is a more in-depth census that gets run every 5 years, although it goes to less people. So the count is done, but whether the numbers that we have right now are what will be used in the future, that I really can't say.
Thank you. I wanted to know, was it over? So yes, it's over.
Sure.
So what is the count for our city?
The total number of people, I don't have access to numbers. Those won't be released until they get sent to the president. So right now we have an idea of how many people, of the expected response rate, but not the numbers themselves.
What is the expected response rate?
The total response rate was 66%.
Equating into numbers?
Well, so we've got, about 95,000 people
Okay.
currently,
I can do
estimated.
that. I
So
can do that. If we're working with 95,000, I can do it. Thank you.
sure.
That's a drastic drop. Woo.
Yes, it is.
Thank you, sir. Vice Mayor Lisa Lucas Burke, you have the floor.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Sweats, it's always a pleasure to hear from you. Worked well with you when you did the comprehensive plan. So I know that you poured your heart and your soul into getting this done. Sad to hear that the numbers were as low, because we all were involved with groups that I am involved in the community that was trying to push these efforts as well. And I know that there were some job opportunities, but the unemployment opportunities that people were able to take advantage of maybe helped to reduce that as well. I don't know if that was taken into consideration, that the unemployment funds that were offered to people to not work were higher than, some of the opportunities that people had to take employment. And then I guess with the internet part being low, I'm not sure if it played a factor in the Wi-Fi and the internet accesses, that we're seeing deficiencies in some of our areas that are blighted, specifically the ones that would need it, the minority, the seniors, and some of the public housing areas. So I know that they received the mail in, but I think that, with the pandemic, I would just say applaud what we have, because people were trying to live and trying to survive. And I think, everything kind of took a back door. So applaud your efforts, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you for those kind words. I appreciate that.
Councilman Battle, you're asking for the floor.
Yes, sir. It's not the efforts, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about is something atrociously wrong here. If we go from 95,000 to 62,000, I mean, that's kind of mind-boggling. We've lost 1/3 of the population in this city. That's an awful lot of funding, and if the numbers aren't right, and if there's some way to recoup some, or make the numbers go up, we really need to look at that, because, that's 1/3 of the population. And I'm not talking about who did who wrong or what went. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the numbers are atrocious, and we need to do a rethink on this and see what, is there anything we've missed, or is there, I don't know, but those numbers are truly strange and unacceptable. Thank you. And again, I'm not throwing water on you. I'm sure you put a wonderful effort in place, but to fall from 95,000 to 62,000, we need to really get to work and do something right about the falling population. Thank you.
Yeah, so
thank you, sir.
Let me clarify that point. So the response rate is, like, say there's X number of households in Portsmouth, right? Which is not going to necessarily be 95,000. It'll be a little bit less. The 66% is the percentage of households that they were aware of responded. It's not to say that it's 66% of the people in Portsmouth responded, because a household can have more than one person. So we're not going to be at 62,000. We will be, we'll be in the vicinity of 95,000. We will be undercounted And there is some sort of statistical modeling that they do to kind of smooth out the fact that a third of the people haven't responded. So it will not be that bad, but it will not be. We will not get a 100% accurate count either. We will still see that there are less people in this census than what we would have anticipated.
Well, why didn't you mention that to me when I was asking for the numbers? You gave me 95,000 and we didn't get but 66% response, and that number would reflect the guesstimate. So that's all I was going on. Now you give me a little more information. So thank you so much for that. That's very encouraging.
Well, remember, Brian briefed us that the 2010 response rate was 70%. And so the 2020 was 4 percentage points less than what it was 10 years ago. Let me say this, and I say it to the members of council who's going to be here for the next 2 years. 45 years ago, the census allowed locals to undertake a special census only if the local government paid for that, and it was a nose count. And I know this because the city of Suffolk in 1976 did that, and I was with the city of Suffolk then as the assistant city manager. Nobody had deputies. And so we did a special census because the city felt that it had been undercounted in 1970. This has been an unusual year given the pandemic and all that's happened during the course of the year. I would strongly recommend that the city council, maybe 2 years to 3 years out, if it feels that there's a significant undercount, to bite the bullet and pay for a special census so that we can do a better nose count under a better environment. I apologize for the sermon, but I'm speaking from experience. Any other comments? Okay, let's move on to our next item, which is report back on the honorary street naming policy.
Yes, sir,
Mr.
Mayor.
Pace.
Mr. Baldwin will also make this presentation relative to what council requested in a previous meeting.
Thank you, and good evening again, Mayor Rowe, Vice Mayor Lucas Burke, and members of council. I believe Mr. Pace has provided City Council a draft of a proposed policy that we've been working on for some period of time. This really started back when Susan Wilson was our transportation planning manager, and has been picked up by Mr. Carl Jackson in recent times. And so we have done a fair amount of research, both with communities around Hampton Roads and quite frankly, in other parts of the country to come up with a draft policy for consideration. And as it is noted, it is an honorary street naming as opposed to physically changing street names. As I'm sure council's aware, the process of physically changing a street name comes with all sorts of issues. The last couple of times we've done them, we've had neighborhoods very much in opposition to street name changes being proposed for honorary purposes when the street name change was a permanent one. So that's how we got into the notion of creating a honorary street designation. This is purely a policy for a city council consideration. It would need to be adopted by resolution, whichever form council would like to effectuate this type of a change. I would just ask you to, if you have not done so already, go back and take a look at the policy and primarily look at the qualifications section. That's an area where I think City Council has to make sure what's being proposed as qualifications for someone to be given this designation on a street sign would have to comply with. And you may agree or disagree with some of the items. Again, we tried to to select from the, other localities what we thought were some of the best practices, but they may not be, what's best for the city of Portsmouth. And we would just suggest you want to take a look at the qualifications section on that. And again, that would be honorary. It would not require people to, change their address on their bank accounts or credit cards or any documents of that nature. It's purely honorary. Would that be glad to answer any questions you might have?
Any questions? Let's see if we can get a consensus. Let's everybody look at the what has been provided by the city manager and Bob. We'll put this on our next work session agenda for discussion. Anybody in disagreement with that? This completes our work session, and we will start our regular session at 7. The work session is adjourned.